Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling, as well as the news and events around the hobby, where we hope to be informative and entertaining and help you keep your modeling mojo alive. How's it going, Dave?
Not too bad, Mike. Not too bad. Spring is in full swing, and
the rain along with it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Makes the grass grow. But On the Bench keeps putting out episodes, so I have my yard work covered. And, we've got a contest under our belt, and man, that still feels good. I'm still riding that high.
Well, I am too, but other than the contest high, any other non-build stuff going on in your model sphere?
Well, I'm struggling a little bit, and I'll talk about that when we get to the benchtop halftime report. I just do note that I have less benchtop time because of the fact that we're now into the rush of spring.
Well, that's no good.
Yeah. How about you?
Mostly been dabbling, looking for something else to start. I'm just kind of getting the itch to start something. I got Batesitis.
Batesitis, that's right. Oh, that's a terrible thing to have. Actually, while I've got a little bit of an itch, not necessarily to start something new because I've got stuff that I need to be finishing on, but I have decided to reorder some of my plans for the year. We're, 4 months through, and I had a plan about the 3 or 4 or 5 items that I hope to complete this year. And I've kind of modified that in my mind because of, I think that happens every year to me, is my plan is to build these 5 kits. And when you look back at the end of the year, at least 2 or 3 of the ones you were planning at the beginning of the year aren't there. And there are a couple that you weren't even thinking about at the beginning of the year.
We'll have to sort that out.
We will. We'll get to that. So what's your modeling fluid of choice tonight?
Well, thanks to our number one fan in Indiana, Mr. Inchai, I'm drinking a little Larceny Kentucky bourbon whiskey, Dave.
What a coincidence. Yes. Inchai, who has good taste in both modeling friends and bourbon, gifted us each a bottle of Larceny when we saw him up at the Indianapolis contest. And I'll be honest with you, this is the first time I've had Larceny. I have not, I've not had Larceny before. So what do you think?
I think it's a little rye heavy, maybe like the Bullet. So I think it's got a similar kind of spice to it. And,
yes,
I'm enjoying it.
Yep. It's 92 proof, so it's just slightly hotter than, say, a Bullet, or your average bourbons are in general either 80 or 86 proof. Now you can get stronger ones, but in general, bourbon runs between 80 and 86. This is 92 proof, so it's got a little bit of a more forward alcohol finish.
It's got a little heat to it.
Yeah, it's not unpleasant, not at all.
No, it's good. I'm enjoying it. So thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Raise a glass to Jeff Groves. Thank you, Inchai. I will be enjoying this the entire episode and probably thereafter.
Probably so. Well, I tell you, the listener mail took a little bit of a pullback last time, but I tell you, they've made up for it. We got lots of good stuff here from our listeners in the listener mailbag.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, first up is Kit Headley again, and he says we're busting his mojo. I don't believe that.
How so?
He says he was making solid progress on some tiny spaceships and a car model, but as he's working his way through our backlog, he got turned on to 72nd scale aircraft forum, the forum that you're barking about sometimes.
Yep.
And he got on the forum for 2 days and hadn't glued anything together since. That can happen with that kind of media and other social media.
Yeah, listen, the not to go off on too much of a tangent, but the folks who design social media design it to suck your attention, because as I forget who it is that says it, you go on Facebook or Twitter and you wonder, well, what's their product? You're their product. They're selling your eyeballs to advertisers. And so what they are doing is every deep psychological trick in the book to keep your attention and keep you from going and doing something else. And man, you really have to watch it. And I'm confessing, it happens to me plenty of times where, you sit down and start scrolling through something instead of modeling, getting up, getting off your butt, going down to the bench and modeling. So you got to balance it. Now, I love our interactions on Facebook with the listeners. So it's not an evil per se. It's bad if you let it consume your time.
He goes on, I believe I forwarded this to you and you answered him about what you get for your membership in IPMS.
Yes. So
we'll talk about that later, but I'm going to skip down a little bit. And I guess in episode 19 is where he is about. He talks about, we were talking about modeling stands and assembly jigs for aircraft.
Right.
A little bit. And he makes these out of Legos.
He's not the only one. I have seen people who do that, both for assembly jigs and for, believe it or not, model transportation jigs. If you were taking your model to contest, making the actual jig that holds your model down in the box that you've got it in out of Legos. Because, of course, you can build absolutely to whatever the model is. You don't have to use a one-size-fits-all jig.
Well, and he also has got an Instagram account, Kits, and it's KITS_KITZ. There he says you can check out also a Lego-built jig for twisting 72nd scale spark plug wires.
Wow, that's interesting. I can barely see 72nd scale spark plug wires.
No doubt. So, Kit, thanks for that. We'll get I think we can link to that.
Yep, absolutely.
Next up, from Virginia Beach, Virginia, is Jim Miras. And I hope I say that right. Jim is a retired dentist at 80 years old, and he was missing working with his hands and restarted modeling. He's climbing the learning curve. Of course, he originally started the hobby in the 50s, but he says he's really impressed with how many things have changed since the 1950s. I bet you are.
Yeah, really.
So he says his modeling fluid of choice is tea, but under the tea drawer is his liquor cabinet, and he has some fine bourbons in there. It tells us to keep up the great work. But back to his point about being a retired dentist. Jim, you need to check out Paul Budzik's webpage and his YouTube channel. I think it's Scale Model Workshop.
Yes, I believe so.
Paul Budzik is he's still a working dentist, but he's been in the profession for a long time. I'm not sure how old he is. And coincidentally, my father is a retired dentist. And I want to thank John Bonani from over at the Plastic Posse podcast. I think his father was a dentist as well, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. He'll sort that out pretty quick if I'm wrong. But there's something that kind of lends itself from that profession to scale modeling, and I think I kind of get it.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, that's exactly what they're doing. In many respects, they are modeling teeth.
They are, and they're using a lot of similar tools that we use, and I think we end up taking over a lot of their tools and materials and use them in our hobby. So you should check that out. Branson Smith, he's just over the river from you in Charlestown, Indiana.
Branson Smith, doesn't that sound like some assumed name of a secret agent?
Maybe. He says he's a part-time member of MMCL. I didn't know he sold part-time memberships.
I don't think we do. He probably is referring more to the fact that he gets to the workshop or to the meetings occasionally.
I know. I'm just teasing. If he's a part-time member, then what am I? I'm a ghost. I'm a ghost.
That's right.
That's what I am. I'm a ghost. Anyway, I don't know. We can answer this, but I think some listeners who maybe served in the military and model can answer this. He wants to know if we ever have trouble building a subject that we were overly familiar with. So where he's coming from is he picked up AFV Club's 48 scale AH-64D Apache, which was an aircraft he worked on in the service, apparently. Mm-hmm. And he just can't turn off the critical eye.
That is, if you are overly familiar with a subject, or if a particular subject is your favorite and you have learned all you can learn about it, it can lead to a paralysis, because what we're building are scale model representations, and by their very nature, there are compromises. Nobody is going to build something that is an exact replica of the real thing shrunk down. And what you have to do at some point, and it's really probably much harder if it's your particular favorite subject, is decide, okay, I can live with this level of detail. And if you can't do that, I can see how that would quickly lead to a paralysis.
Now, some of our friends over on the Model Geeks podcast, those guys are all naval aviation guys. And, right. They've alluded to some of this before, so I kind of understand where he's coming from, though I can't relate to it personally. Now, I've gotten to a point where I was overly familiar with something by the time I got done building it.
SU-76.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, our good friend Dave Waples, he's back again. Now, apparently, he's going to clue us in here, Dave.
Okay.
He says all these Yamato kits that are coming from TACOM aren't the same scale.
He's right. I went back and looked at that, and he is correct. The big turret is 72nd. The secondary armament is like
it's 35th scale.
35th scale, and then
does that mean I have to buy it?
Yes, that does. And then the anchors are like 16th scale.
Okay, well.
So, yeah, he's right. They're not all. I went back and looked at that, and he is absolutely correct. They are not all the same scale, which is, it kills the theory that they're going to give you a Yamato piece by piece, which is a shame. But it's interesting that the details from that ship can generate that level of demand, such that you get kits in 3 different scales from the same manufacturer with different parts of the same ship, but not the same part.
So this 15.5 centimeter gun might be as big as the main gun turret in 72nd scale.
Oh, I suspect it probably would be just about the same size.
Okay.
But yes, it does mean you have to go get it.
He also gets a nice compliment on the way we patched together the show from Roscoe Turner, going back and forth between the studio and the live stuff.
Well, you deserve all of that credit. You did a masterful job with engineering.
That came out pretty good. Was not all on me. We paid for a little bit of that.
Well,
we just didn't know it till I got the final product. And he says he'll see us in Vegas.
Good. I want to see a lot of everybody in Vegas.
All right. Warren Dixon from Elkton, Kentucky. Now, we've heard from Warren before.
Yep.
He's just saying, he's not able to attend a lot of model shows, and he's not caught up on that end of the hobby as a lot of us are. Wishes he's closer to Indianapolis. Well, Elkton can't be any further from Indy than I am.
It's a little further, but not much. Maybe another, it might be another 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, that might be enough to take all the fun out of it. For him, I don't know. We all have our limits, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But then again, guys, as I've said on episodes before, if you're not going to contests, whether or not you compete, that's your choice, personal choice. But if you're not going to contests near you, you're missing out on something. You're missing out on something that's really great in the hobby. And I tell you, if you start going, you'll quickly become addicted to going, because they are just such a good hobby experience.
So Elkton's down close to Middle Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's West Bowling Green.
Okay. Well, Warren, you're going to want to watch out for the show down in Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Yep.
And our show, the MMCL show, coming up in September as well.
I have been trying to get Warren to come up to that show. So this is our personal plea. Come to the show.
Or Dave's going to drive down there and get you.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'll show him a good time.
Yep.
Now, this is a good one, Dave. Paul Wheeler from Springfield, Illinois. Hey, Mike and Dave. I was the fellow that said, hey, in the middle of the model room at Roscoe Turner that recognized your voices. Says he's already geeked out and overwhelmed, and finally attending a show that, he kind of heard our voices and kind of all went from there.
That was great. That was great. It was so unexpected. Never thought about it before in my life. We're just standing in the model room talking. He walks up recognizing our voice. So I guess that's something that's going to happen now and then.
Okay. He says he's planning on attending the Nationals with a 72nd scale Corsair, and he's hooked on Gumball Head.
Good. We need the folks at Three Floyds need to be sending us some swag or something.
He says his favorite is Middle Finger Space Station.
That's not bad. I don't like that one as much as Gumball Head, but it is not at all a bad drink. Of course, almost all of the Three Floyd stuff is good, other than the Robert the Bruce, because I just don't like Scotch ales. All the other stuff is very drinkable.
And he says, thanks to me, he's purchased a KV1, a JS2, a T-3485, and an SU-76. All
right. Well, I bet you his SU-76 experience is going to be better than yours.
It probably will be if it's the Tamiya kit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scott Gentry at the Posse's working, trying to finish up that kit, and I showed him some photos of what I'd done so many years ago.
Didn't look like the same thing.
He says his wife's coming with him to Nationals. He's reserved a cabana for her for 3 days, and now he can shop the vendor room with a clear conscience.
There you go.
That's a wise man right there.
That's right.
Richard Kapp from Clovis, California is back once again, and he just thanks us for pointing out Vilka Models YouTube channel. That was the one who had the sequential builds for aircraft.
Yes. Yeah.
I've not checked it out yet. I apologize for not doing that, but
it's a good
had a
channel.
lot going on.
I have too. And that's, speaking of social media, that's another thing that can drag you away from your workbench. There is so much good modeling content on YouTube, not to mention all the other stuff on YouTube, history, etc. And you can fall down rabbit holes real quick with YouTube. But yeah, no, it's a great resource.
All right. And he tells us that after listening to the Dr. Strangebrush episode, he knew he had to get over his fear of using an airbrush. And he has spoken to John several times. And with his coaching, he's purchased paints and equipment. So
hey, he's going to love this episode.
He's going to love this episode. So don't go to sleep. Don't go to bed. Just buckle up and listen, because he's going to be back with us here shortly.
Yep.
All right. And the rest of his email is for goofs, gaffs, and blunders, and it's a pretty good one, but we're going to save that till we put that episode together.
I can't wait.
Ken Beckler. All right. This is interesting. His Workology, he put a trademark by that, is breaking the kit down into sub-assemblies with the idea that each is a kit into itself, which means he always has something to do. Now, we've talked about this before.
Yep. And that is a great approach. You can't do it necessarily with every kit. Some kits lend themselves more to it than others, but that is a great idea if you can focus on sub-assemblies, break the kit down into, in essence, 5, 10, 15 smaller kits. It's easier to focus. It's easy. You get that sense of accomplishment of finishing when you finish one sub-assembly. I think that's a great attitude.
He says he's got no Shelf of Doom because of that. And he also wishes you luck on your Tupolev 128.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to need luck, and I am jealous that he does not have a Shelf of Doom, because my Shelf of Doom is mocking me. We'll talk about that a little bit later too.
And he must have latched onto our talk about trivia a little bit. We've not really got into trivia, but we've joked about it a little bit. What movie uses the words peace on earth and purity of essence?
Isn't that Dr. Strangelove?
I think you're right.
I believe it is.
Okay.
Or How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Bomb. That is the actual title of the movie.
It is.
Yep.
Well, we got Dr. Strangebrush.
Yes. It's similar.
Gordon Sorensen, No Geography. Last episode, Dave was talking about PC-6s from Air America.
Yep.
Mike Grant makes Air America decals in 48 scale.
Yep.
But some of the smaller ones might fit the PC-6.
Yep. And I also have a passing acquaintance with Mr. Grant, and may hit him up to see if he will shrink the sheet down for me.
There you go, which is Gordon's next suggestion.
Yes. Well, Mr. Grant and I have a passing acquaintance with each other. And by the way, if you've ever seen his models, he's a fantastic modeler, period. But what his real specialty is doing what you did with the Airfix Bofors and truck. He takes kits from the 60s, 70s, and 80s vintage and manages to turn them into just beautiful models.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I don't know that I went that far with that little kit, but
you did.
It did come out pretty nice.
There.
It did. It got me there. Well, he's got links to Mike Grant decals and also an article on the PC-6s used by Air America in Southeast Asia. So we'll put those in the show notes.
Yes, I definitely want to read that article.
Brad Belsheim, just telling us he loves the podcast along with some of the others. And he sent a picture or two of some of his armor. I need to do something with these pictures. I'm really bad about that, listeners. I apologize.
We need to set up some gallery.
Well, they can submit them to the
Facebook page.
The Facebook page in the community section, but it's
right.
I don't know, it's kind of clunky, I think.
It is.
So I've started saving them to a gallery drive on my computer. I need to just start uploading them.
Yeah. Yeah, you could post groups of them to the main feed.
I could, and everybody would see them then.
Yeah, exactly.
Enrique Perium from Hanover, Germany.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. TJ over at the Posse put him on to us. So thanks, TJ.
Thank you, TJ.
Enrique has a small YouTube channel called The Race for Terra. And it's geared for either wargamers who want to get into scale modeling techniques or scale modelers who are relatively new to weathering. And it's interesting because he says his videos, the whole point of his videos is to show ways to save time and get good results as possible in the amount of time that an average adult with a family and a yard, I think that's directed toward you.
It is.
And a full-time job can realistically invest into modeling.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I've not watched any of your videos yet, Enrique, but I took a quick peek at the I guess kind of the splash page for your Facebook channel, and looks like pretty good stuff. So folks need to check it out, especially if it's time-saving stuff.
Definitely.
Man, just keeps on coming.
This is going to be a long episode.
It may be. Well, Dave, that's the end of listener mail. quite a
All
bit.
right.
Lot of fun stuff in there. Keep it coming, guys. Please send those to Plastic Model Mojo at gmail.com.
We love the interaction, guys. It's one of the things that keeps our mojo hopping. While you're listening to this, or when you're done listening to it, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to rate the podcast on whatever podcast listening app you're utilizing, if you're utilizing one. We appreciate a review. We appreciate 5 stars if you can give it to us. Helps raise the awareness of the podcast. And while you're at it, tell a friend. The best way for us to pick up new listeners at this point is to have somebody who's already listening recommend it to a friend. If your friend, almost everybody has a smartphone now. If you take their phone and show them how to download a podcast listening app, Stitcher, whatever, and then put our feed on it, we appreciate that.
And while you're rating the podcast, you can check out the other podcasts out there. We've got On the Bench from our friends down under in Australia. The Scale Model podcast with Stuart and his ever-expanding cast of characters out of Canada. The Plastic Posse podcast and the Model Geeks with us here in the United States. And I hope everyone tuned into our time with the Posse.
Yeah.
In their last episode. That was a fun time talking about social media.
Yeah.
And finally, we got James and Malcolm out of the UK with Just Making Conversation. They always have an interesting and fun twist on whatever they happen to be talking about.
Yeah.
In addition to the podcast, we've got a lot of non-podcast content creators out there we like to support regularly. First up is Stephen Lee with Sprue Pie with Frets. And I'm hoping to get Stephen scheduled this week for a little interview and some fun. And we'll get him on the show in one of the soon-to-be upcoming episodes. Likewise, Chris Wallace, model airplane maker, great blog, great YouTube channel. We've talked about that before. We're also cooking up a fun segment with Chris and one of his modeling buddies. And if you're listening, you know who you are. We have to flesh out this idea and see what we can come up with. But we're going to get Chris on with someone else who's a longtime listener and supporter of the show. So who happens to be one of his good buddies up there in Ottawa.
Uh-oh.
We got Jeff, Inch High Guy Groves, with his Inch High Guy blog, blogging all things 72nd scale, and he's this episode's modeling fluid sponsor.
And I'm telling you what, this larceny is going down smooth.
And finally, Jim Bates, Scale Canadian TV. Jim also hung out with us with our Posse segment alongside us. In fact, he took a broadside from you, Dave.
That's right.
Is he issued any payback for that yet?
Oh, no. He was just happy to know that I do it to you and everybody else, so that it wasn't just exclusively him.
That was pretty rich, though, man. That was pretty good.
Yeah. Hey, you see a shot like that, you just got to take it.
All right. Well, that's all the plugs I got.
Well, I'd appreciate everybody if you are not a member of IPMS USA or IPMS Canada or whatever your national chapter happens to be, if you would take a moment and consider joining. I actually was interacting with the folks from IPMS Canada, and they've experienced a membership bump. So I'm hoping that at least some of that is coming from listeners in Canada joining IPMS Canada. IPMS USA, we've got the nationals coming up. Those things don't happen without the national organization. It's vitally important that people join and support the national organization. So if you'd consider doing that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, that gets back to Kip Headley's comments. I'll bring that back around, wondering, what he got for his membership, other than a really good magazine, which I think is probably worth the membership price. Tell them about all the things that, well, not just him, but everyone, what the membership actually collectively supports.
One, you get a really nice magazine, and as nice as it is, and as worth the money as it is, that's almost incidental. What IPMS USA does is it provides a framework for all of the local chapters to exist and operate. They provide insurance to the chapters. They provide, through the series of regional coordinators, keeping clubs from stepping on each other's contests, making sure that no two contests happen on the same day too close together. That's not been a big concern for the last year, but in more normal times, it is actually a very big concern, because something that really hurts both chapters is if two chapters too close together hold a contest on the same day, they split the attendees, and it hurts both shows. And those local contests in many cases are what funds the chapter activities. Like our contest funds the rent for the space that we hold our club meetings and club builds in. It also provides an ability to reach into the back catalog of the magazine. So there's a lot of good information there, and you can access it through contact with the national organization. They've got a good website, a forum, and basically, if you're having trouble figuring something out, or having trouble, you're new to the hobby and you're trying to learn or gain information, you can contact them and they will direct you to someone to help you with whatever you're dealing with. So it's a fraternal organization. It's a bunch of guys giving their time, their hobby time, to help the hobby be better as a whole.
Well, I hope that answers Kit's questions, and everybody else's for that matter. It's a good way to do your part to support all that's going on, really.
Yep.
Plastic Model Mojo is now brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com. Well, Dave, it's countdown to Vegas time.
I cannot wait.
I know you can't. I can't either. At the time of this recording, we are a mere 106 days away from the 2021 IPMS National Convention in shining Las Vegas, Nevada.
We're almost in double digits, man.
7 days we'll be there.
I know.
Oh, man. It's going to come quick.
Yep.
Well, with all my goings on around my new job, I'm kind of behind on email, including to Bob Lomasaro. So I do have a little content, though. First and foremost, I'm sure Bob would tell everyone to please pre-register for the contest, for the convention, not just the contest, but
amen,
the whole shebang. Avoid long lines. Get your stuff. Get your stuff early.
Spend more time in the vendor room and in the model room,
and hanging out with us.
Yeah, that too, because Lord knows that's important to all y'all.
That's right. Now, I peeled back one of the listener mails because it was kind of pertinent to the national convention, because this is from John Allen in Lafayette, Indiana, which is real close to the Roscoe Turner Show.
Yes.
Their first ever show was the Roscoe Turner Show, and now they'll be traveling to Vegas for the Nationals. So it's a big step up.
Buckle up, Brett, baby. If you've never been to a Nationals, it will knock your socks off. Everybody remembers their first Nationals.
Well, he wants it to knock his socks off, and here is his concern that he's asking about, and hopefully we can shed a little light onto this. They're going to be flying out to Vegas, and they'll arrive at 8:30 a.m. on Friday. Okay, so he's due to family commitments.
Right.
John cannot attend the entire 4 days of the show, which that I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat.
Right.
Not uncommon.
Not at all.
One of his disappointments with the Roscoe Turner Show was not anything Roscoe Turner had a lot of control over, but they didn't get there because of other family commitments that day till around noon. Well, at noon, the model room was already closed for judging. And I don't know if he ever got in, if he hung around that long or not, but it didn't open up again till like 4:15, something like that. Pretty typical. Yeah. He's just wanting some information. If he shows up on Friday at 8:30 a.m., is he going to be able to see the models?
I've got great news for you. You're going to get tons of time to see the models. The way that the IPMS USA National Convention is judged is that on Friday evening at about 7 o'clock, sometimes it's 8 o'clock. There's a full day of contest on Friday. You have until like 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday to enter a model if you are going to enter a model. But the room is open up until 7 or 8 on Friday night when judging begins. They do all the judging between, believe it or not, 7 and about midnight of Friday night. The judges are in there for 4 and 5 hours. It's really a thankless, hard task, and there's a bunch of them because there's a bunch of models. But yes, if you get there 8:30 in the morning on Friday, you will have all day Friday to see the models. And then Saturday morning, the judging's done. They've reopened the room at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. whenever they reopen the model room. So you'll have all Saturday. The contest judging is done Friday night. So the model room is open all day Saturday until the awards announcements, which again are, 6 or 7 at night. So you should have plenty of time. You won't run into that problem. And that problem is something you see at local shows, one-day shows.
Yeah, there's one-day shows, and they're not. What's a one-day show? It's just they need a few hours to judge, and it's got to be, fairly early in the afternoon, or it's going to be late in the evening before people get home.
Exactly. And I, again, shout out to the guys at Roscoe Turner. They had an unbelievable number of models show up, well above what their normal is, and they still managed to get everything judged and the show moving on schedule. And that, I'm sure, was very tough to do.
So, John, that's a really good concern and question, and I hope we've given you the information you need to give you some confidence that you are going to enjoy the show over the weekend that you're allowed to attend. I'm sure you're not alone. He mentions that. I'm sure you're not alone in that concern, or,
Yep.
if you've never been to one.
Yep.
I'm sure this year it's going to be a lot of people who've never been to one are going to show up. So,
yep. Even if you can only go for one day, I mean, even if you can only attend for one day, it's still worth going. Now, again, if you can't get there by Friday night, you're not going to be able to enter the contest, but entering the contest is such a small part of the convention experience. If all you can do is get there for 4 or 5 hours on Saturday, I'd still urge you to do it. It is well worth it. It's fantastic.
Well, that's it for Countdown to Vegas.
All right, Mike, what's your benchtop looking like in the face of a new job and spring having sprung?
Well, I've managed to get to the point where only the back sides of the wheels for the Zis 2 need to be chipped.
All right. What's the plan forward from there?
I'll probably marry the wheels to the split trail and the lower shield and do some earth tones on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, marry the gun subassembly to the split trail subassembly and put a fork in it.
Okay. So
other than the base.
I was going to say, so technically at that point, the model is complete, although you're still planning on doing a base.
Yes. And the base is started. It's just not very far along.
Yeah. So is anything else on your benchtop?
I tell you, I've been trying to clip away the support structure for one of these 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns that Inch gave me at the show.
Mm-hmm.
I think the support structure on this model is overkill.
Do you?
Yeah, it's almost impossible to get out of here.
Well, I know he said he downloaded that one from Thingiverse.
Yeah, I think whoever did this should have had separate files for the gun and the pedestal and the mount.
Yeah.
That way there wouldn't have been so much of this crap to cut off, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
I've kind of been dabbling with the Reba Botan a little bit again. I need to get those scale drawings printed out in full scale. See where that's going to go. And I've been spending a lot of time just trying to find my next project. Not sure what it's going to be.
So what are the contenders? We can solicit
it's
solicit
still,
some listener input.
It's still the BM13 Katusha.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, man, I'm getting it to start one of those 7 TPs or a T34.
Well, it's a coincidence that you talk about maybe reordering your builds or what you want to do, your plans for what you're doing next, because I've actually been going through kind of the same thing.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. Maybe we can come to a consensus on something.
All right. Well, quickly, let me tell you, the benchtop, the M30 has not moved in the last 2 weeks. The Mosquito has not moved. What I've been working on the last 2 weeks was my plan to learn to get better because I tried something new. I got the AA5 Ash missiles out of the Trumpeter TU-128 kit and actually took the approach that our listener mentioned earlier, took these as a subassembly, as a little model unto themselves.
I was about to say that.
Yep. And they're really pretty good out of the box, but like anything, they can be improved a little. And so I added reinforcing plates from styrene that I talked about last episode. And then at your recommendation, I got those Archer 3D rivet decals, and it's the first time I've ever used them. So not only did I use the chopper for the first time, I used these rivet decals for the first time. I've got to say they came out great. I've got one completely painted, and I did that because I wanted to check and see, if the rivets still were there and visible, and they are. So the other 3 are all done. So all I've got to do is prime and paint them. And unfortunately, Russian air-to-air missiles are white, which white is difficult to paint, and you never actually paint anything white. You always paint it a light blue-gray or a light yellow-gray. Never paint anything pure white or pure black. But all I've got to do is paint up the other 3, prime and paint up the other 3 missiles. And that subassembly can be set aside for inclusion when I complete the kit.
Would you expand a little bit on what these decals are from Archer for those who don't know what you're talking about?
Okay, they are 3D decals. They're decals that have height and depth to them. They're on water slide paper, just like a regular decal. The clear backing film is incredibly thin. I mean, disappears quite easily when it's applied. But the decals printed are just little dots. They're little rivets. And when you run your finger along them, you can actually feel they have depth to them. They're not just a printed decal dot. They actually are a raised dome, as it were.
Somehow they're resin cast. They're not 3D printed.
It's the resin cast. Yeah, I guess you're correct that's what they are. Is they're somehow resin cast onto the decal paper, and they also make the same thing with stitching for World War I aircraft. 3D printed or resin cast printed stitching. I know you said that model railroaders use this a lot to enhance their rail cars.
Yes.
But I was skeptical because, again, I'm like, these really can't have any depth. But they do, but they don't look like they do. When you first look at them, you're like, those are just dots, printed decal dots. They're going to disappear as soon as you paint on them. They don't. They absolutely are 3D representations of rivet heads. And so when you apply them to the model, in my case, to the backing plate, you end up with what I was trying to simulate, which is the 4 rivet heads on the backing plate, on the fin of the missile. It's a new weapon in my repertoire, and it's one that I'm definitely going to keep because I can see other applications where it would come in handy. And he makes these in all different sizes and configurations too. He may have like 6 or 8 different sheets of them. And I highly recommend the product.
Well, I'm highly recommend you getting a friend to try it first.
Wait a minute.
Hey,
Did I get
out.
suckered? Huh, I hadn't even thought of that. Shit. Well, on to the more important part where we were talking about, we had an episode at the beginning of the year where we were talking about what our plans for the year were, what we would like to accomplish. And here we are 4 months in.
Hadn't started any of those projects yet.
Well, I've started the TU-128. I've started one of those. But as I'm wrapping up the M30 and the Mosquito and getting further into the TU-128, I've been thinking about what I want to do, and some of those things have been changing. I want to do the TKS, and I bought the kit. And then after I bought the kit, Mike told me that he thinks they're issuing another version with not rubber band track, but resin track or something rather than the link and length track. So I may have to pick up another TKS kit to get that.
Well, I would find out what exactly they've done before I ponied up for a second kit. So I don't know what they've done. It's called Easy Assembly. I don't know. They've got a version that's got this simpler track arrangement in it, and they've got another version that's got the simpler track arrangement in it and the Hataka paints to paint it with.
Ooh, that may be tempting.
I don't know. So somebody out there on the net will have what actually is going on here. IBG has been very responsive to my direct messaging to them on their Facebook page. So you might just ask them to send you a picture of what this new track arrangement looks like.
Yeah, I'll do that. That's a good idea.
Because I understand your fear. Those things are absolutely tiny. It's like 72nd scale track links on most tanks.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. That's about the size they
They're
are.
absolutely tiny. I mean, they're probably like 6 millimeters wide.
Yep.
Something like that.
And actually, thanks to you, I remembered that in rummaging through the stash, I remembered that I had the Trumpeter 35th scale SA2 kit, which I bought and wanted to do for a number of years, but hadn't. And frankly, that one's kind of calling to me. So I may slot that in ahead of the TKS in my build schedule. Also, I have determined that I am going to get one thing off of the Shelf of Doom and finish it this year as part of my number of finished models. That's either going to be a T-3485 or a P-51, but one of those two is going to end up getting finished. But I'm kind of rethinking the lineup for what's next. So what's next for you? What have you been thinking of?
Well, if you're serious about the TKS, I was kind of entertaining the fact of jumping into that one too.
We can do that as a buddy build.
Well, really, that's about my only deviation, I think. And then I got to start painting the E16.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about time to start another 72nd scale wingy thingy.
All right. So are we going Seagull? Or are we going
I don't
Kingfisher?
know.
We going French?
Seagull, no, we don't go French yet. I got to get a few more planes under my belt before we go that way. Maybe a Kingfisher, maybe an Arado 196. Maybe.
Good choice.
I don't know. I can't decide. Maybe the Seagull, though that's a pretty involved project.
Yeah.
I don't know yet. I got a Sky Raider back in the stash too. I'd like to build.
That's also an excellent choice.
So we'll see. I don't know. That's
well, good.
I guess that's our bench times.
Mike, have you been monitoring the announcements?
I have. I've been monitoring the announcements.
I have too. I always pay attention, see what new is coming down the road, and what's caught your eye.
The one that's caught my most in the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks, is TACOM has a double kit boxing of the Panzer I. They're boxing both in the same box, you get an Aus A and an Aus B model of the Panzer One.
Now, what's the difference between the Alf A and the Alf B? Is that machine guns versus 20 millimeter?
No, they put a different engine in the B that made the hull longer, so it's got an extra road wheel station off the back end, so it's longer.
Oh, okay.
So it's just a bigger tank. Not much, but that's the primary difference. So they've put them both in the same box. You buy one, you get them both. Or you buy one kit, you get two models. Let's put it that way.
Well, and they're Panzer Ones, so they're small anyway.
No, yeah, they're not very big at all. What's your fave of the first fave of the last of the fortnight?
Clear Prop, the guys who hit the ground running, releasing just fantastic kits, has announced a 72nd scale EB1 tracer, or as the Navy guys know it, the Stoof with the roof. It was based on the S2F airframe, and it had not a rotating disc on the top of it, but a giant teardrop shaped, non-moving radar array. And frankly, the only way to have done an E1B tracer before had been a conversion of the Hasegawa S2F kit using, say, I think Falcon models or Wing 72. One of them made a conversion kit to do the E1B, but I'm sure that Clear Prop's kit's going to be fantastic because everything they've done up to now is, and this fills a real hole in 1960s and 70s naval aviation. So I'm happy to see that.
You going to buy one?
Probably. Thank you. So what else has caught your eye?
Amusing hobby is a boxing. They came out with the Ferdinand tank destroyer with the crane is a double kind of kit, and I got no interest in the crane. But they've now coming out with a boxing that's just the tank destroyer, and it's got decals for the last chassis that was built, the one with all the chalk marking all over it, which doesn't interest me either. But I want to see if this kit's better than the Dragon kit. If it is, I'm going to get it.
Now, this is the late version, right?
No. This is the Kursk.
Okay, it's the early
Operation
version.
Citadel with the no cupola on the roof of the superstructure, no bow machine gun.
Gotcha.
And because the markings, I have a set of decals from somebody, one of the old VLS companies, sub companies made some decals for all the units that were at Kursk. They had a real colorful kind of cryptograph kind of unit insignia on the back end of the superstructure, and they make a decal set that does all of those. So that's what I want to do with it.
It's a big honking vehicle, man.
You got another fave of the 2 weeks here?
Yes, I do. Our friends at DOS Work, who released the U9, which I still have to get one, have not done it yet. Because, again, I know there was one up at Roscoe Turner, and if I had bought it, I'd have been building it that night. So I held off. But the folks at DOS Work have released 2 crew sets, resin figures.
I saw those.
3 in each set for World War I German submariners, which is great because there's plenty of World War II German submariner figures. But, of course, they're completely different than the old World War I looking guys. They also released a series of paint masks so that you can do different numbered ships. And also they have released a masking set so that you can mask off the saddle tanks, which are painted a different color than the rest of the hull. On the top, they're darker. And instead of having to hand mask that, they've provided a set of templates so that you can just paint and mask those off. So I'm definitely going to be getting those items as well. Anything else catch your attention?
No, not really. If nothing else has caught my attention. I got a yawn though.
Yeah, I got a yawn too.
Oh, it's going to catch some flack, man. But I'm going to go there.
Go there.
The Quinta or Quinta Studios SDKFC 250 interiors, the radio faces and dashboard
Right.
panels.
Yep.
The 3D printed, pre-painted things.
Right.
Cheaters never win.
Well, that does bring it. We'll have to have that talk on a future episode. What constitutes a good modeling aid, and what then crosses over into the line of cheating? And I assume these bother you because now everybody's 251 interiors are going to look exactly the same.
They're going to look exactly the same. And if you want a shortcut to a quick, good-looking interior, I mean, by all means, I'm sure these are fine quality products. I mean, people have been raving over the cockpit interiors for a couple of months now, right? So,
yep, absolutely.
I'm a build guy, not a paint guy. That's kind of my MO, right? And this is just like, oh, come on, man. It's funny because the guys over on Model Geeks, one I can't remember who it was. I think it was Whitey was saying the exact same thing. He's like, nope.
Well, and yet I will tell you that those Yahoo panels, those printed cockpit dashboards, I love those things. They are fantastic looking. They're very realistic looking. And frankly, I think that in most cases, they're better than what I could do myself. So,
oh yeah. And I get that completely.
And popping that, I don't necessarily get off on spending hours detailing a cockpit dashboard panel and then trying to paint it and shadow it and do all those details. If I can pop that thing in and move on, get myself closer to finished, I love those. So we'll have to have a whole episode about that.
We may. And the other part is it's not just the looking the same, is that the gray radio faces in these sets. I've not had these sets in hand, so I don't really know.
Right, you're working from pictures.
But if they look like the pictures, I don't like the color at all, and I'm going to be real curious what folks do with these to kind of shift that, because you kind of stuck because all the dials and everything else is already painted color.
Right.
So you're going to be kind of stuck with this color.
Well, maybe you can wash it to shift it a little. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see what folks do with it. But it's a shortcut. Not for me. Well,
let's get into our interview with Dr. Miller of Model Paint Solutions, or as we lovingly know him, Dr. Strangebrush.
All right, folks, I think you're going to enjoy this again. And, we're going to have him back again after this. So it's just going to keep on coming. But here's our next installment of Dr. Strangebrush. Well, Dave, we are back again with our special guest, Dr. Strangebrush. We're going to be speaking with Mr. John Miller again of Model Paint Solutions, our sponsor for the show, and hopefully going to give us a lot more fresh airbrush tips for us. John, how you doing tonight? Welcome back.
Hey, howdy. Hanging in there.
Well, good.
Well, I am waiting for all sorts of new airbrush information.
Well, I'll try not to let you down.
Well, good. We got a lot of excitement last time you were on, and hopefully we'll continue that, and then we'll get some more excitement. Then a few months down the road, we'll do it again.
That sounds good. All
right. Well, the last time you were on, we kind of still had some questions, I think, around the wet and dry coat topics of airbrushing. Why don't we just jump right in and let's expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Before we start talking about wet versus dry coats, I thought it might be a good idea to take a step back and discuss briefly prepping the plastic prior to applying that primer or paint with a wet or dry coat. And the reason I say this is I get a lot of emails from guys that are switching into acrylics, be it Vallejo or Model Master or Mission, whatever, and they're used to using lacquers as primers. And as you guys know, if you've shot a lacquer primer, it cuts right through grease and mold release, compound, right, like there's no tomorrow. And that's not going to happen with an acrylic. So a lot of guys switching over will run into all the problems that I'm sure you have heard of, and and that is the paint coming off. It's not sticking. It comes off with with tape. It doesn't pass the fingernail test, and that in and of itself is a debate that I'd be willing to have. The whole idea of the fingernail, having to have a finish that can withstand chipping away by your fingernail, which I don't subscribe to that. None of the finishes that I use are that hardy. But I don't take them off with my fingers either. So I think there's a happy midway there, between nails and being, life color fragile. But anyway, one of the big steps to making an acrylic primer or paint work is getting the plastic sufficiently clean of oil, hand oil, and mold release before you even apply the paint.
And John, I will admit to you that because I'm an enamel lacquer guy, you are absolutely right. I do very little, if any, cleaning of the plastic prior to applying either the primer or the first coat of paint. I had never even, it didn't, because of what I use, it never even entered my thought process.
Yeah. And you don't have to, because with a lacquer based primer, the chemistry, the lacquer will just cut right through, finger oil and mold release and get right to the plastic. And as etch it ever so slightly and bite into it. So the first problem most guys have is getting the acrylic to stick. And this often is a hurdle, so steep that they give up. And I've had more than a few guys try to make the switch. And because they weren't willing to try a couple of very simple tricks, they never could get it to work to their satisfaction, and they gave up on the paint. And I can't blame them. I would too. But before you get to that point, there's a couple of easy things you can do to fix that. And the first is, before the first part comes off the sprue, I usually take all of the sprues and I put them in a big, those aluminum turkey baking pans you get from the grocery store, real thin ones.
Yeah.
Get one of those. I have a selection of sizes so that the sprue can lay flat in it. And then I take a mixture or a solution of denatured alcohol and Windex. And let me just digress for a minute on the denatured alcohol because it's important. The denatured alcohol, if you can get the kind I'm referring to, is made for cleaning glass, and it will say for cleaning glass. It cannot say to be used as a fuel or as a for a cook stove. That's the kind of denatured alcohol you can't use. It's only the kind for cleaning glass. Moreover, that kind of denatured alcohol is getting hard to find. We're having difficulty finding it here in the Pacific Northwest. And we've been told by, Lowe's and Home Depot that they're no longer carrying the denatured alcohol for cleaning glass. So we're having to go to, specialty stores like painting stores and stuff to get it. So if you can't find the denatured alcohol, you can go to your pharmacy and get the highest concentration of isopropyl you can find on the cabinet there, whether it's 70%, 71, 90 if you're lucky. Just get the highest percentage that you can. And mix that 1-to-1, 50-50 with Windex. And that's the Windex, the old style with ammonia, not the new style with vinegar. Okay? Right. Windex with ammonia 1-to-1. You can reuse it over and over again for cleaning sprues. So once it's done, pour it into a big container, put a cap on it, put it on the shelf. It's good for years. So I basically cover the sprues in that solution. I let them sit at least 2 or 3 hours, and then I'll wash them in very warm water, pat them dry or let them dry by air. And at that point, you've removed most or all of the mold release, which is, one of the biggest problems. Then you build the model. And in the process of doing so, you're imparting more finger oil onto the plastic. You're also imparting static charge. If you've been doing a lot of sanding, a lot of buffing, you are in that process imparting a charge to the plastic, and we'll cycle back to that momentarily. So you've completed the model. Your next step is priming. You may want to think about, if you can, if the model lends itself to it, you may want to think about wet buffing the surface of the model with micromesh prior to shooting primer. And I'm talking a micro mesh of about 8,000 grit or higher. And that's a fine enough grit that you won't see scratches in the plastic, but it'll roughen the plastic just enough to give that acrylic primer something to bite into.
I'd never thought of static charge building up.
Yeah.
Does that really have an effect?
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that I started doing years ago, and actually I started doing this when I was in Omaha, Nebraska. I was at the University of Nebraska there for 6 years. And, in that environment where it was cold, we had the heater running a lot.
Sorry.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead. It's Bates.
Wouldn't you know it? God. So anyway, in that weather there where we were in the Midwest, we had the heater on. It was cold, and I was down in the basement there. And I have to say that it was at about that time I started using Chem Wipes, which is a lint-free paper-based tissue that is used for basically cleaning the lenses on microscopes where you can't have any lint at all. I started, a few boxes magically jumped into my suitcase on the way home, and I tried them at the bench. And I can tell you that when I started buffing the plastic out with a Chem Wipe, one of the things I noticed is my primer didn't bead like it did oftentimes before. And I think you may have not seen this. If you're going right to an acrylic primer and you don't use a preparatory dry coat, but you try to go right with a wet coat, sometimes you're lucky. Some acrylics will lend themselves to it, others don't. And worst case scenario, you can actually get the acrylic to bead on the surface of the model, which is not what you want. I noticed that when I buffed the surface of the model out with a Chem Wipe, that beading went away. So I attributed it to that. That's my experience with it. I've been using a Chem Wipe dry because the only time they remove static electricity is when they're used dry. And they're formulated to do that. That's one of the reasons that we use them around microscopes, because you don't want to impart a charge to the objective on the microscope, which will then attract dust. So if you use them dry, they're formulated to remove static electricity. And I noticed the beading when I was trying for a wet coat went away. So anyway, because of that, I've stuck with it. But we're cycling a little around here. But anyway, back to the micro mesh. If let's say you're doing something really easy, like a 1/48 scale jet with a very clean surface, right? That lends itself to a little wet micro meshing to prep it for priming. If you're doing a 1/72 scale armor piece, with a lot of corrugated surface to it, you really can't micro mesh that. So, and you don't have to, but if you can micro mesh the surface, especially if you're doing a large aircraft with, a large flat surface area, that'll go 1,000 miles to giving you way better adhesion of your acrylic primer when you shoot it.
Well, on the topic of acrylic primers, Stynylrez, Mission Models, Vallejo, you got a favorite? I've used the Stynylrez. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I've used the Stynylrez too, and the Stynylrez really lends itself to what I call the fire hose technique. The stuff goes on. You can shoot it on pretty wet. It levels pretty well. As you guys probably know, it prefers a larger size nozzle than other primers, and it prefers a higher pressure as well, right? From what I hear, most guys get the best results with like a 0.3 nozzle and upwards of 25, 30 pounds of pressure.
What's your favorite?
Well, I do like. Well, I'll tell you, I like Mission. And that's not just because it's on my site. I do like Mission. I think the Mission primers is probably the one of the stars of the show when it comes to that particular brand of paints. Well,
I'll tell you, this weekend I was at the shop where our local club gets together and builds on Saturday morning, and a member, Ed Tackett, was singing the praises of Mission Models primer, that he really liked the priming quality, but also the adhesion quality of it.
Yeah.
And how tough it was.
Yes. And all of that's true. And all of that's predicated on getting that plastic free of oil and grease before you shoot it. Because Much like any acrylic-based primer, Mission is very sensitive to oils on the plastic. So if you get those free, all of that's very true. If I could, while we're talking on Mission Models primer, my suggestion on that is I dilute it 1-to-1 with Mission Thinner, but I find that I get the best results, best defined as a finer, smoother finish with less tip dry, less goobers building up on the needle, if I add Liquitex Flow Aid to about 5% by volume. And when I'm talking Liquitex, and I'll take a moment here and digress, Liquitex is a series of products that can be found at most of the craft stores across the United States. It's one of the reasons I recommend them. They're easy to find. Joann's Fabrics, Michael's, you name it, they usually have an acrylic, paint aisle. And within that section, you'll be able to find Liquitex Flow Aid and Liquitex Paint Retarder. They're two separate reagents, Flow Aid and Retarder.
Would you take a moment and tell people what those two things are and what they do and why you use them? Because I think, because you don't see them in normal hobby shops, I'm not sure that a lot of folks are actually familiar with what they are and what they do.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Some of the paints are now coming out with their versions of both. Vallejo has Retarder. Vallejo has a Flow Aid, AK as well, as I recall. So some of the brands are beginning to fill that void, and it's a void because I've been using these reagents in acrylic paint for 15 years. And it's only within the last, I'd say 5, maybe a little bit more.
Exactly.
That they've jumped on the bandwagon and said, "Oh yeah, Flow Aid and Retarder, here you go." So anyway, what the two do, the Flow Aid is going to affect tip dry. That is to say, the tendency of paint to build up as goobers right there at the nozzle needle interface, right there at the tip of the brush. Whereas Retarder is going to slow the drying rate of the paint. Now, the important thing and the conflicting thing in some ways about the way these two reagents work is they both have effects on each other. That is to say, Flow, which preferentially affects tip dry, will also make the paint dry a little slower. Likewise, Retarder, which preferentially affects dry time, will also make the paint have less tip dry. So there's a little overlap between the two, but they affect more in a more pronounced way and more specifically either flow or paint dry, if you will. Okay, so if you use in the average acrylic thinner, if you use about 5% of both, 5% of Flow Aid and 5% of paint retarder, you'll find way less tip dry. Way a smoother finish. You'll get less of that powdery overspray, especially at a 90 degree. All the aircraft guys know that wing root powder that you get at the side of the fuselage when you're shooting your prime. You'll see a lot of that will decrease. You won't get rid of all of it. A lot of that is how you apply it, but you will see a decrease in that powdery overspray when you use both the flow and the retarder together. So back to the primers where this is relevant. I had really good results with Vallejo primer. I shot the white. I think they had the white and the gray. And the way I would shoot the Vallejo primer is I would add, Liquitex Flow Aid to 5%, paint retarder to 5%. So 10% to both. And I would shoot it neat right out of the bottle. And I had great results with that. There's a lot of good primers out there. I don't really have a preference for one over the other. I've used Mission a lot lately. I have to confess that I've also started using the last couple of models. I've switched back to using a lacquer primer only because it's so much easier. But again, as long as you follow those suggestions about degreasing and removing finger oil and doing those other tricks, you can get an acrylic primer to stick just as well. So much so that, 3 or 4 hours after it's dry, you can be buffing it, with micro mesh preparatory for your primary color.
Speaking of that, let me ask you, do you normally, as a matter of course, after you've primed, come back and micro mesh the primer, or do you only do that if you find an imperfection, a booger in the paints in the primer somewhere?
So if I find we prefer to call them an imperfection, Dave.
Tomato.
Yeah, if I find a booger right in the middle of that beautiful panel that I spent all my time on, you may be forced to pick up the micro mesh. I'm a firm believer in micro mesh products. I've been using them for years. I like the 6, 8, and 10K grits. And the 6 and the 8 are really good for buffing the burgers out or imperfections. Now, back to your question, do I micro mesh the primer coat? I have to say that I was doing that every time, usually with 8, maybe 10, every time before I shot a primary color, until I had a friend of mine. A shout out goes to Blaine S. here of Seattle, who, instead of using micro mesh as I was doing, started using a chem wipe. It's something that's been on my bench for ages, and I had never thought, well, why don't you actually try to buff out with a chem wipe? I started doing that, and I really like the result you get with that, because it has, you should give it a try. It has enough of a texture to it, the tissue does, that it takes all the powder and everything off, but it gives you just a really nice sheen. So in lieu of doing that, which I've started doing here in about the last year or so, maybe 2 years, I'll usually do 12K or 10K micro mesh wet, and I always use it with cold water with just a drop of liquid detergent. So it's nice and slippery.
When you are putting on a primer, how do you apply it in a particular fashion?
I do, and that's one of the things I was reflecting on, preparatory to this conversation, because again, I've started in the last couple of models just for fun shooting a lacquer-based primer, which I shot for years and I haven't, in a long time. And you can just go right to a wet coat with those. Boom,
Right.
You can, to a similar degree, but not the same, with some acrylic primers. Some, in my hands, some acrylic primers lend themselves to doing that fire hose, wet coat approach better than others do. One of those would be Mission, if properly diluted with the retarders and the flow aid, because it's key. Another one that lends itself to that fire hose technique would be Stynylrez. But if I'm not shooting one of those, or if the primer's just being temperamental, or the plastic's being temperamental, we've all been there. For some reason or another, the primer isn't going on like you want it to. It's not sticking where you want it to stick. So in that situation, and in most, I will usually shoot a dry coat prior to a wet fill coat. And that's the same technique I use for shooting a primary color as well. If I'm doing a Hellcat and it's going to be all blue and I'm doing the wing, I'll shoot left to right a light dry coat or a tacky coat, and then I'll come back and do my wet fill coat. And I think that this is maybe a good time to segue right into dry versus wet coats.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that your average modeler understands what a dry coat or a wet coat is. So give us a little bit of a, if you'll pardon the expression, primer on the subject.
There's the rim shot button.
I know. From across the bridge, we saw that one coming, didn't we? I used to do these airbrushing classes. Hopefully, we'll be doing them again here at Skyway Hobbies here in Seattle, actually Renton, Washington. And it's very easy to demonstrate them to a class. And because half the guys, when they see it done, they say, "Oh, I've been doing that for years. I didn't know that's what you called it." And the other half go, "Hey, well, I didn't know you could do that." So it's kind of a full range. But in short, what a dry coat is imagine you have your brush dialed in. You've got the paint diluted just right. You've got the pressure just right. You have maybe 20 or 30% lever throw. Now, when I mean lever throw, we're talking about the lever. If you have a pencil style airbrush, the paint lever. 0 would be no paint. 100 would be the lever pulled all the way back to the stop. So let's say you're somewhere around 20, 30% throw, and you've got a line. Let's say, now this is all, in your mind, if you will, a mind exercise. Let's say that this line is 1/8 of an inch wide, and you're spraying this line. In your mind's eye, while you're spraying that line, without adjusting the lever throw or anything else, simply increase the distance between the model and the brush. And you'll see the line first become wider. You'll still have a line, and then you'll see the line become diffuse to the point where it might be 1 inch wide, kind of a tacky pattern. That's a dry coat.
Okay. And
now,
what does a dry coat do for us?
So what a dry coat does is a lot of guys, especially with the acrylics, where they don't tend to hit the model and level the way lacquers do. You love those lacquers. They hit the model and they want to move. Acrylics don't always want to move. So one of the ways you can trick them onto the model is first shoot a preparatory dry coat. So let's go back to our 48 scale Edouard Hellcat, holding it in our hands, and we got the left wing and the right wing. So I'm going to shoot, let's say we're shooting primer. So I'm going to shoot a dry coat on the left wing, left to right. Okay. I'm doing, putting that dry coat on with the brush held farther back so that the paint, as we were describing, is a diffuse pattern. And as it's flying through this increased distance from the tip of the brush to the model, it dries out, it loses solvent and thinner, and it hits the model tacky, right? So you shoot that tacky coat onto the left wing. You move over to the right wing. You shoot a tacky coat onto that. That might take maybe 30, 40 seconds, right? Now you go back to the left wing. Now that tacky coat has had a moment to sit. It's kind of semi-dried. Now you can shoot a wet fill coat. For the wet fill coat, we're going to move the brush closer to the model. We might even add a bit more paint. We'll pull the lever back a little bit more. The big thing we're going to do is we're going to increase the rate at which we move the brush, because now we're going to be putting out way more paint. But when that wet paint now hits the model, it won't be hitting bare plastic. It'll be hitting a substrate of tacky paint. So it will be less prone to spider. It'll be less prone to run. And you'll get this very nice, very good coverage with that wet fill coat, right? So now you've done the wet fill coat on the left wing. Well, now the right wing has had a few moments to sit and dry with its tacky coat, so you cycle back and you shoot the wet coat on the right wing. I use that model as an example because some guys think, oh, you shoot the dry coat and then you wait, 30 minutes? No. You want to shoot the dry coat, but you want to come back and shoot the wet fill coat on top of it while the dry coat is still wet and tacky. You don't want it to be entirely dry, right?
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's one good reason right there to use a dry coat application. And one way to think about it is if a dry coat is being applied properly, that area where the paint is hitting the model, if you have a good light and good magnification and you're watching carefully as the paint hits the model, with a dry coat, the paint is never ever shiny. The moment it goes shiny, you're into a fill coat.
Gotcha.
Because you see it, because with a wet fill coat, that paint has more solvent, more thinner in it. It hits the model wet. It's going to reflect light. It should not be reflecting light if it hits the model as a dry coat, because that solvent should have been burned off by now, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one good reason. Another good reason is for a dry coat. A lot of guys, have masked off, boats, fuselage, waistbands or whatever, and they want that really nice tight line to reduce the chance of wicking wet paint under that tape. Shoot a dry coat at that tape model interface first to kind of seal off that burnished tape, if you will, before you hit it with a wet fill coat. Doing that little trick on top of taped off lines will go a long way to stopping wet paint from wicking under the tape. This is a trick that I use a lot on canopies as well. And that is, let's say I'm doing a P40, and it's all OD green. When I get to, and let's say I've built the model with the canopy closed and it's glued on the model and it's all masked. Yep. Well, I'm never going to shoot a wet coat right on top of a masked birdcage canopy. because you're just waiting for paint to wick under some of those
creep
masks.
under. Yeah.
Yep. So as I'm shooting that P40, as I reach that canopy area, I'm going to transition from a wet coat to a dry coat. And, with practice, you can do it and you don't even really think about it. You instinctively pull the brush a little further back from the model. So the paint's drier now, not wet. And that tacky coat will hit that birdcage mask canopy, hopefully seal some of those tapes off so that you can slowly build that color up as a dry coat without ever having to go to a wet coat and risk getting the paint to wick under the tape.
Now, is it a sign that you've pulled back too far in applying a dry coat if the paint has become pebbly?
Yes.
Okay, that's your sign that you've pulled back too far.
So if you pull back too far, you'll get to a point where the paint's so diffuse that you're not even getting a coat. But
gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? So, but the pebbly, now, if you're shooting a primer and it does look pebbly, a little pebbly at first when you shoot the dry coat, that's okay. Because remember, that paint isn't entirely dry. That tacky coat that's just sitting there is just that. It's tacky. It's not dry. It's tacky. It's still mobilizable, if you will. As soon as that
when you put your wet coat on.
Exactly. So as soon as that wet coat comes on top of it, that dry coat kind of solubilizes to a certain degree and moves and levels. And it actually gives you better, smoother coverage that way. You just get more paint in the area so it can level and do its thing. Make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Awesome.
I had not thought of, you're right. I'd not thought of it exactly that way, but yes.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with acrylics, you get spoiled by enamels or lacquers because they are so self-leveling.
Yeah, exactly. And acrylics usually not. Now they can be tricked into self-leveling, and we can get into that here. Hopefully, at the end here, we have some suggestions for making acrylics behave a little better. But one more thought about dry versus wet coats, and that's as how it applies to clears, glosses, and flats.
Gotcha.
So if you're doing a race plane and you want that, 10-foot deep gloss shine, or, a Corvette or some kind of car, you're going to want to be able to shoot a dry followed by a wet coat, because even if I'm shooting lacquers, I will oftentimes shoot a slight khaki coat of my gloss, and then I'll come back and shoot a real good heavy wet coat. And that just gives you more gloss, gives you more paint on the model that will then level and give you a much, much glossier finish. Now, that's not the case if you're shooting flats or semi-flats. And I get a lot of emails from guys and they say, I'm shooting flat. Mission will do this. Vallejo will do this as well. I've seen Vallejo do this to me. And I get emails from guys saying, I'm shooting this flat or semi-flat, and I just can't get it to go flat. It just keeps, kind of shiny. And then through a series of emails, you come to find out that they're shooting this as a wet coat, like you would a gloss. And, that doesn't work very well for semi-flats or mattes or flats. So there's a good application right there where you probably want to pull the brush way back and shoot that semi-flat or flat as a dry coat. And to shoot it as a wet coat actually defeats the purpose with some of the clears.
Yep. I've experienced that myself, and it's a pain in the butt when it happens.
It is, because you get those little shiny rivers, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you stay away from that wet coat, if you get really adept at reading wet versus dry when you're shooting a clear, and you stay away from stumbling into a wet coat, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And unfortunately, what I've found, and maybe you've got a suggestion for this, once you've made the mistake, trying to get it to go flat in that area is 10 times harder than the original application.
Yep. Yeah.
It's tough to make disappear.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's actually in line with the old adage that more paint isn't going to fix it.
That's true a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
It's true for a lot of airbrushing applications. I've taught classes and I've watched guys try to spray away runs. It doesn't work.
Well, before we get away from the wet versus dry, can you we've talked about wing roots and we've talked about primers. Is there any other situation that comes to mind that you might want to do this dry coat, wet coat tandem kind of application you've been talking about?
Well, one of the things that another area that I like to use it is metallics. Now, not so much again with the lacquer metallics. I've been shooting a lot of the AK metallics lately, and this is true for Alclad as well. And
how do you like the AK metallics?
I love them. And, again, just have to be honest and say that they're on my site. The reason they're on my site is that I love them. As you know, we've talked about it before. One of the things about Model Paint Solutions is I really don't put anything on the site that I can't get behind, that I haven't used at my bench and gone, wow, this is really good paint. And I tried the AK metallics years ago when they first came out on a Focke-Wulf 190 V18 Kangaroo. And the article's on the site, and they blew me away at the time. I said, these are great metallics. And so when I had the opportunity to add them to the site, I did, and I've got no regrets. They are excellent.
And that is kind of a holy grail for metallics, is an acrylic metallic.
Yes. Yeah. And, and I'll tell you, an acrylic metallic that behaves surprisingly well and is not on the site, and probably never will, is the Vallejo range. I've had really good results with the Vallejo metallics. Now, I shoot them again with Liquitex Flowhaid, Liquitex Retarder, and sometimes I even drop in a little bit of Future Floor Wax to make them a bit hardier, the finish. Mm-hmm. But I've gotten beautiful results with the Vallejo range of metallics, so a shout out goes to them. But when and it's a good segue, because that's actually a metallic that an acrylic metallic that does like to go down first as a dry coat, followed by a wet fill coat. You get way better results with the Vallejo metallics if you shoot them like that. At least I do. Whereas if you're shooting the AK or the Alclad lacquer metallics, you can just fire hose those. They level on their own and they're beautiful.
Yep, I'm a huge fan of the Alclad metallics, and part of the reason is that they're, I'm an idiot modeler and they're pretty idiot proof. Yeah. As opposed to an acrylic metallic. Yeah. But I know that a number of modelers have been singing the praises of the AK items as an acrylic metallic. Again, you apply those as a dry coat first and then a wet coat?
I usually do. I usually apply most of my paints like that. I've gotten into the habit of applying a slight dry coat before I switch to a wet coat for all of the reasons that I said earlier. I get more paint on the model. I get less runs. I get better leveling. It's very rare that I fire hose something, even if I can. I usually don't, because I'm just in the habit of shooting a dry coat first.
Sure. So even with an enamel or a lacquer, you can do even though it might not be as necessary to get the finish.
Yep.
You can still do the dry coat, wet coat thing.
Yep. And full disclosure, the AK real colors are now on my site. And again, they're on the site because they blew me away. The aircraft colors are up on the site. The AFV colors are in stock. And as soon as I turn into a laptop octopus and get them all uploaded on the site, the AFV colors will be available as well. So full disclosure.
Full disclosure, I will tell you, I am famous in my club and elsewhere for writing articles with titles such as "I hate acrylics." I actually did write a series of articles entitled "I hate acrylics." Now, keep in mind that was many, many years ago. But I will tell you that the AK product, the AK Real Color product, thinned with unicorn tears, the Mr. Color leveling thinner.
Yep.
Is as close an experience to spraying an enamel as I have found in any acrylic paint. It's very, very forgiving, which is what I like about enamels and lacquers.
So I couldn't agree more. And as chance would have it, I'm working up the DML Dragon. I know I'm going to get this wrong. GTK. Oh God. Boxer, which is this wedge-shaped armored personnel vehicle that is that's being built by a consortium in Europe. It's a pretty neat-looking thing. It's wedge-shaped, kind of like futuristic, 8-wheeled, armored vehicle. And anyway, I picked it up a couple of weeks ago in order to try the AK, and I did something different on this model. I bounced back and forth between using the same paint in either Gunze leveling thinner, unicorn tears as you call it, or the equivalent in the AK range, which would be the nitro lacquer thinner, which is basically, it's very similar to Gunze leveling thinner, and you get beautiful results in this and with that thinner. But what blew me away is I tried their high compatibility acrylic thinner, and I bounced back and forth using the same paint, but different thinners, and doing fine line and fill work on this 72nd scale boxer that I'm doing. And I have to tell you, the stuff shoots as well and in the high compatibility thinner as it does in the lacquer thinner. It kind of amazed me.
Is that the AK Blue thinner?
That's the AK Blue label. It's high compatibility, non-lacquer. It's a non-lacquer thinner. It's an alcohol water-based thinner. And I start my analysis of any paint usually at 50% paint. And then I drop it to 40%, then I drop it to 30%, then I drop it to 20%. And at each percent, I test, coverage, fine line capacity, tendency to develop tip dry. And it's not an exaggeration. When I shot, I started with 50% and I got a little bit of tip dry. That's 50% paint, 50% high compatibility thinner. When I dropped that down to 40% paint, I shot all of the wheel hubs on this model, and I didn't have to wipe one goober off the tip of the airbrush. And when I finished, I looked at the tip of the airbrush, and there weren't any goobers there.
That's amazing. I mean, because again, using a non-lacquer thinner,
it is.
It is. I am super impressed by the real color range.
It is. And I have a theory on this, and that is
I want to hear it.
The paints themselves are acrylic lacquers, so they have to be shipped by ground. So it is a lacquer, as you know. And I'm thinking if there might be just enough of the lacquer carrier, if you will, within that paint that I did not have to add any Liquitex Flow 8 or retarder to deal with the tip dry. I mean, I had both reagents ready to go, because this is an acrylic thinner, so you have to expect, and based on my experience, tip dry. It simply didn't happen. So I think, there might be enough of whatever the lacquer carrier is in the paint such that when you dilute it, now I was diluting it to 40%, I diluted it down to 30% for fine line, and I was getting 0.5 millimeter lines with no tip dry. It was amazing.
That is amazing.
You got to give the high compatibility thinner a try because it also doesn't stink your shop up because you really can't smell it. It smells like Vallejo. It smells like Mission. That's about it.
The stink, that's in the eye of the beholder. I kind of actually like the smell of lacquer thinner, but that's just me. I'm weird.
I shot Gunze for years. It was my favorite paint. I still have a bunch of it. As you guys know, it's often very difficult to get. And when I went back and started shooting the real colors in the nitro thinner, I got that whiff of what smells like Gunze. I had this nostalgic kind of flashback. Yeah, this is what airbrushing should smell like.
Well, I will say I have been blown away by the AK real colors and their closeness to the experience of spraying an enamel or a lacquer.
I'll tell you,
and they're durable too.
They are.
We don't want to get into fingernails and scratching, but it really is durable and sandable.
Yeah, it is. It is, and that's the other thing that surprised me is the durability. And lastly, something I commented on to a friend just a couple of days ago: how easy they clean.
Yes.
And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm used to fighting the acrylic out if it's Mission, if it's Vallejo, you're going to be fighting it out of your brush. Now, for those, I usually use a mixture of denatured alcohol and Windex to clean most acrylics out of my airbrush. I know I'm going to get emails for that one. I'm ready. For cleaning real colors, I switched to just straight denatured alcohol. And that stuff cleans up like there's no tomorrow. My brush is clean with 2 or 3 strokes, and I'm done.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah, I could go on, but if you wanted to, I think the next thing we were going to talk about is some diluting strategies for various acrylic paints.
We talked about kind of the general wet coat, dry coat, kind of a general high level topic. So let's talk about maybe this modeling. We talked about it before we started recording. I've got a
mottling.
I said mottling.
Mottling.
Mottling. Just want to make sure.
Dave.
No, I just want to make sure everybody hears.
Oh, okay.
Mottling, not modeling.
So we've got a 72nd or 48th or 32nd FW190 or a 109, and you've picked a scheme out that's got all this really diffuse, small looking pattern on it. How are we going to do that, John? Tell the armor guy how he's going to do that.
So, yeah, I'm trying to think about how I'm going to use the line I normally do on a podcast and not get in trouble.
You can use it.
Okay, so mottling. Now, I'm a Luftwaffe guy. I love mottling schemes. That's in part why I like doing Luftwaffe aircraft, because they have some very interesting schemes, as you know. Ditto that for Italian and Japanese aircraft as well.
Yep.
The thing about mottling in 72nd scale, which is to me one of the bigger challenges a modeler airbrush enthusiast can have, is mottling in that small scale. And since the models themselves are so small, what I liken it to is the first time that we are with someone of the opposite sex and experience them in let's say a biblical way. Is oftentimes over before you know it. So I liken 72nd scale mottling to that. Since the model is so small, you can't think your way painting it. You can't think your way through it because it's over too fast. So you have to practice doing these. It's almost like shooting dots, but it is a dot with a wiggle. You're shaking the brush at the same time. 1/72nd scale modeling, at least I put a lot of time just sitting behind the brush, practicing on sheet styrene till I was happy with it. And I'm still learning how to do it better. But I can tell you that it's something that it's a technique where, again, you shoot. It's like you're shooting a dot, just a round circle dot. You're only pulling 10 or 15% throw on the airbrush. But when you're shooting that dot, you are wiggling or moving the brush in a very small, subtle way in order to get the shape of the model. And that's the challenge right there. And especially in that scale. Now, when you move up to 48 scale, the models become, correspondingly larger. And you can actually, at that point, they're big enough where you can think your way through painting one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because, now you're looking at something that isn't literally a millimeter or a millimeter and a half long. Now you're looking at a model that's 2 or 3 or 4 millimeters long. So you can, here's the beginning of the model, here's the middle, and here's the little tail I want to have. Now, at that scale, you can start shooting them and thinking of it in that way. Ditto that for any scale larger than 48 scale. So that's the first thing on mottling. And the other thing is Now, mottling is another situation where, since it's going to be fine line airbrushing, so you're going to have the paint diluted for fine line, you're going to have air pressure and working distance adjusted for fine line. But it's one of those start-stop fine lines, which means you're going to be building up a lot of goobers on the paintbrush or on the tip of the airbrush. So, I have a small container with a micro brush soaking in thinner right next to where I'm airbrushing. And every 2 or 3 models, I stop, I clean the tip, I go do 2 or 3 more models, I stop, I clean the tip. That's the only way I found to ensure that that big goober doesn't fly off the tip right in the middle of that panel while you're putting a model on it. I haven't found a better trick than just, hey, wipe the tip every couple of seconds. That said, after shooting the AK or any other, lacquer, Gunze did the same thing. You didn't have anywhere near the tip dry if you were shooting Gunze with leveling thinner. But modeling with an acrylic paint, doing the start-stop, that's going to require a lot of tip cleaning. Frequent and copious amounts of tip cleaning.
Well, and not only that, but testing it on your scrap piece of plastic before you go back to put more modeling on the model.
Yep, exactly right. And appreciating that every minute or 2 minutes or so, you should do a full throw clear of the brush, because the paint is there within the tip. You're using so little paint that it'll start clogging up inside the tip as well. So after you've done, a panel or 2 of models, go off target, if you will, aim at the garbage can, full throw, and then readjust it, and like you said, test on your sheet of styrene before you go back to the kit. Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. That's models. The best I can just, again, something I used to demonstrate in the classes. And once you see it done, again, it's not that hard to emulate. A little more difficult to explain with words. Sorry.
You're painting a word picture for us.
Yeah, I will tell you that 70-second scale modeling, you're going to have to sit down with sheet styrene and put a couple of hours into it.
Well, I will say that I have seen your 70-second scale Machi, what was it, 200 or 202?
Yep.
And finest example of mottling I think I've seen, as far as being able to apply those green models over that sand color.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yep. And as chance would have it, that's an Italian model. And it looks, if you look at the model, at each model individually, they look like a little sunburst.
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually easier to shoot than are the German and Japanese models, the little starbursts. And I can show you that technique, or I can show you that trick sometime. The hardest ones to do are really those single isolated little models, like on the side of an ME109 or a 190, where you just have a little, a series of little, those are the hard ones.
And the irony is, the guy who did that on the 1-to-1 didn't really give a rip. He's just pulling an air gun trigger.
Yeah. And, using a whole bunch of tricks, like, because they had fan tips at that point. So they were, blocking the tip with a portion of their finger to get a smaller pattern, and all kinds of stuff. So
never in the world was this guy, while he's applying this, thinking, you know what, 50 years from now, some guy's going to be trying to do this on a 70-second scale model with an airbrush the size of a pencil.
Yes. I have actually had that thought, looking at so many. You look at, we both know that there are a couple of aircraft that show up, pretty regularly at contests, and some of those schemes, you have to wonder, how many guys have sat and stared at some man's work for thousands of hours, trying to duplicate this man's. Anyway, interesting thought.
Yeah.
But, so did that answer your question on mottling? Mottling?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I got to practice. That's the in the nutshell version.
That is the way that you get to Carnegie Hall, man. Practice.
Yep. It's actually what I use. Not to beat this into the ground, but I think everybody has a twitch in their hand. They have an innate little movement that they can do quickly with their hand. That's what I've harnessed to do mottling. I'm sure if I develop Parkinson's one day, it'll be this little twitch that'll just be magnified. But it's a pattern that my hand does when I make my hand wiggle, if you will, in a very small, controlled way. I come up with a tiny little pattern, and I've harnessed that pattern when I'm doing a 72nd scale model. So I think about it, I do it, and then I look and see what I did, because again, they're so small you don't really think your way through them; you just do them.
All right, what's next?
Yeah. Talk to us about acrylics.
So dilution strategies for acrylics. So what I've tried to do here is kind of lump some of these paints together, try to get all of them covered as best I can. I'm not going to hit them all, in part because I make it a point to not really give suggestions on a paint that I don't know. And I don't get to know a paint well until I've actually used it on a project. Shooting it, for a few minutes to help somebody do a line is not really learning the paint. So I've not really spent that much time with the Hataka paints. I've shot them once or twice, but I can't really give much comment on them. But some of the paints that are more commonly used, I can give some suggestions on. And, starting with Vallejo Color, Life Color, Model Master Acrylic. Now, when I'm speaking of Vallejo right now, I'm talking about Vallejo Color, not Vallejo Air, which is, as you probably know, way more dilute than Vallejo Color.
Right.
So for all of these acrylics, you can also add Tamiya. If you're shooting Tamiya in an acrylic thinner, you can add Mission Models if you're if you're shooting in an ITS thinner. All of these acrylic paints really benefit from having both flow aid and paint retarder added to them for airbrushing. And I give percent volume. So, if it's 10% volume, it's, 1 part, to 9 for a total of 10, right? So,
right.
With regards to Liquitex Flow Aid and Liquitex Paint Retarder, for most acrylics, you can use those at 5 or 10% volume each. And what I do is, let's say for Vallejo, I have my bottle of Vallejo thinner made up, for when I'm shooting that brand. And already added to the thinner, I have 10% flow aid and 5% paint retarder. That's what I like to use in my Vallejo. That's already added to the thinner ahead of time in the bottle, ready to go. Don't have to think about it. It's just ready to go. The same is true for Life Color. For Life Color, if you guys, a lot of guys are still using Life Color. I love Life Color acrylic paint. It is finicky. It is fragile.
Yes.
It's not the easiest paint to use, but if you can work your way around some of these issues, it will provide the smoothest finish that I've seen from all these acrylics we're talking about right now. So that's the upside to Life Color. And in my hands, there's no easier paint to apply with a hairy stick than is Life Color.
Yes. So, yes. But it brush paints very well.
Beautifully. But again, if you're my Life Color, I have 10% flow aid, 5% paint retarder, and I add 10% future or pledge with future shine to my Life Color thinner. That helps with the stability when it's dry. That pledge really locks the paint in place and gives you a much hardier finish. So anyway, bird's eye view. If you're shooting any of these acrylic thinners, you may want to think about adding both flow aid and paint retarder to your thinner. Now, that said, what percent paint? A lot of guys send me emails. They're having problems with clogging. They're having problems with nasty finishes and powdery finishes. And then through a series of emails, come to find out they're shooting 60% paint, or in some instances, 50% paint. That's a lot of paint. That's a pretty high percent of paint. So in general, for these brands that we're discussing right now, for general work, I usually want to be somewhere around 30 or 40% paint, 50 to 60% thinner. That gives you very, good coverage with, very nice fine finish on the end. If I'm doing fine line, not general work, but doing a fine line, even mottling, I'm going to take that paint from 30 or 40% and drop it down to maybe 20 or 25%, depending on the brand. I'm painting with broad strokes here. but you're going to drop your percent paint down for a fine line with most of those brands. You'll also drop your pressure down correspondingly. So most of these brands like somewhere between 12 to 18 PSI. Let's say 15 is a good, it's high, but let's say that's a good medium for some people. For fine line, you're probably going to want to be around 10 PSI, maybe even less with an inline air valve. So that's it for those brands. Now,
do you think that a lot of the differentiation between acrylic brands has to do with the fineness of the pigment?
There's a lot of variabilities there. There really are. One of which is how fine the pigments are ground. And it's very clear that some manufacturers are using finer pigments than others. A lot of it is the solvent that they're using, what the thinner is based in, what alcohol is being used. There's a lot of variables there.
Well, another thing you're saying that I think a lot of people, particularly those just starting out airbrushing or modeling or whatever with a D, you're talking dilutions that are kind of most people just getting into it would think would be out of bounds if you'd ever have more thinner in the mix than paint.
Yeah. And this is, I think it was one of the first big tips and tricks that I did. The leading cause to airbrush unhappiness is too high a paint, a concentration, because once you get that paint too high, you start getting tip dry. You start getting goobers. You start this.
Right.
The brush just can't atomize the paint. And I've lost track of how many emails I've gotten from guys that are having problems. And I find out they're shooting 50%, 60%. And I say, hey, try 30%. And it never fails. They always come back and go, hey, less tip dry, less goobers, and it just flows. And it does work.
Less paint.
Less paint. And it is for a lot of guys just starting, it is counterintuitive because for some reason 50-50 is where a lot of guys start, and they kind of stay there. And another one, not to beat a dead horse, but another one is guys who start at 50-50 and they get good at 50-50, which you can do with lots of paints. And then they want to try to do fine line, but they're still using a 50-50 mixture of paint. And, that's a real steep climb, to get a 50% mixture of paint to give you a 0.5 millimeter wide line.
And not to blow sunshine up Dr. Miller's skirt here, but he keeps mentioning his emails and his correspondence. John is one of those guys in the industry who really does interact with customers, with people just seeking knowledge. And he's done so with me on a number of occasions. I know many people he's done that with. And, it's in this day and age, that's not as common a customer service as you would want, as you would want to experience. But it is nice that you've got somebody with as much experience as he has telling you, okay, here's where you are. Let's alter these variables and see what you get. And it's a real learning experience. And he's been very, very generous.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
That's all right. I'll say bad things about you later behind your back to make up for it.
I hear from Jim. So.
Yes, I know.
Well, were we about to talk about another category of acrylic paint?
So while we're on Vallejo, we talked about Vallejo Air. We talked about Vallejo Color, which is a thicker paint. Let's go to Vallejo Air. A lot of guys like using Vallejo Air, and for this, the paint is thinner; it's less viscous. And for that, what I find at my bench is I get really good results with about 70% paint and 30% thinner. And that thinner, again, still has my Liquitex Flow Aid and my paint retarder in it. But now with the Vallejo Air versus Vallejo Color, I drop that dilution down to just 30% thinner because the paint's already pretty thin. And while we're there, something I mentioned the last time I was on was the new versus the old mission. That's how I'm referring to it. Mission V1 versus Mission V2. So when Mission models first came out, it was the thickest acrylic I'd ever seen. Some of it was about as thick as toothpaste when it came out of the bottle. And it was thicker than Vallejo Color, which is the thicker version of the two Vallejos. Mission V2 is much thinner. The viscosity has been decreased. And so most of the percent volume suggestions that were given early on really don't work for this new version V2. And I'm going to be putting a piece up on the site in the next week or two that is going to make some suggestions for shooting the second version of Mission, which is thinner, very much like the Vallejo Air is a thinner version of Vallejo Color. The Mission V2 is a thinner version of Mission V1. So with that in mind, for Mission, the new Mission, I'm finding you get beautiful results diluting the paint 50-50 with just Mission thinner. And again, that's Mission thinner, like all acrylics, with a little bit of flow aid and paint retarder in it. And ditto that for the primer. Mission primer shot 50-50 with its thinner, with the flow aid and the paint retarder, gives you absolutely beautiful results.
Well, when do you think when did this change happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Near as I can tell, the change came just before the round of colors were released, where we got the Ford Arcadia blue and the purples, and some of the car colors came out. I think it was probably about 6 or 7 months ago, maybe longer now, but somewhere in there. And that's when I picked up on a change in the viscosity of the paint. Now, the upside is that the paint actually, the newer version of paint actually shoots a little easier than the older version. It's thinner. It gives you a finer finish with less texture. It gives you less tip dry than the first version of the paint. But you don't get something for nothing. And what's been given up with the new formula is the forgiving nature of the Mission paint. As you probably remember, when it first came out, it was so thick and so viscous that you had to work to make it run or spider. When I was demonstrating the Mission when it first came out for airbrushing classes, I literally had to put the brush on the sheet of styrene and pull the lever back to halfway to get a good spider to demonstrate it. Didn't have to do that with any of the other acrylics that I was demonstrating. But that characteristic is gone. So it's not quite as forgiving as it was initially. But the upside is you're getting a slightly finer finish than you were before. So.
John, I got a question for you.
Sure.
You are very eclectic in you. Now, part of this is, I'm sure, your business, and you need to know all of these different paint ranges and all of their performance characteristics. But most modelers that I'm familiar with, and myself included, get, if you'll pardon the expression, married to a paint range.
Yep.
They find something that they like, and that's their preferred paint range.
Yep.
Me personally, I have two: AK for the acrylic, Real Color for the acrylics, and what used to be called White Ensign models for the or color coats for the enamels.
Those are beautiful paints.
Yeah, I know. I love them.
Yeah.
But what is there do you think there's an advantage to not being married to a particular paint range?
So I think that's a twofold answer. I think early on, for someone just new to the sport, you should probably stick with one paint. If you're learning all the the intricacies of airbrushing, how to dilute the paint, what pressure, what working distance. I mean, that's just scratching the surface, right?
Right.
You want to take as many variables out of the equation as you can. So At that stage, if you're just starting, sticking with one brand of paint and learning that brand is probably the best way to go about it, because each brand is different, and Model Master doesn't behave the same way as Life Color, as the same way as Vallejo, they're all slightly different, in the way they shoot. So for beginners, the answer would be stick with one paint, get to know it, get to know your brush, get to know your technique. And then once you have those established, you can reach out and try a different paint, and you have a springboard of skills to use to learn that new paint, right? For the guys who've been doing this for a while and have some experience, with a brush, with this many great paints available, each with its own strength and weakness, I say use whatever is the best paint for the application. And, in that regard, to digress for a second, again, I'm doing this little 70-second scale boxer, GTK boxer. And, I find myself doing most of it in the AK Real Colors, in part because I'm working that up as a demonstration article for the paint. And here I am looking at these rubber wheels that, unfortunately, I know the kit comes with rubber wheels. And I'm thinking, I don't like the color, obviously, that they are. I'm going to have to paint them. And I'm thinking, well, obviously, you've got one of the best paints ever made for shooting on these rubber wheels, and that's Mission. Because
that's I had never thought of that. That is a really interesting and profound, because those things are the bane of most modelers' existence. Those rubber, and the fact that there's a paint that will actually kind of adhere to them.
Yeah, exactly right. And I was thinking before I put Mission on Model Paint Solutions, I saw a video of John Tampkin, the guy that started Mission, shooting some rubber wheels, model wheels. And after they're dry, he takes the wheel and he turns it inside out and turns it, like a donut or a pretzel, I should say. And the paint doesn't flake off or come off the tire.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and and this isn't news. I mean, everybody who's been using Mission on these tires knows that this paint is great for that, because since it's a polyurethane, it is going to give. It's not going to flake. It's going to flex, right? So there's an example. I'm having a blast shooting all these really nice, tight, fine lines with AK, oftentimes in a nitro-based lacquer thinner. But I'm going to switch to my polyurethane acrylic for these tires because, AK probably wouldn't work. So
gotcha.
That's an example of with some experience handling, diluting, and spraying paints, and this many brands to choose from. It's almost a shame not to, branch out a little bit and, use each paint for its strength. Lastly, the last little category of paint that I was going to touch on real quick, I think we've talked about Vallejo, we talked about Mission, but we need to talk about what I call the AC/DC paints, and that would be Tamiya, and now you can add to that the AK Real Colors. And these are paints that can be diluted in either a water-based acrylic thinner. In Tamiya, the example would be the F20 or XF20 thinner. Or you can take Tamiya, as you guys have discussed, and dilute it in Gunze leveling thinner, and it shoots beautiful in both thinners, right? AK Real Colors is the same way. It's a paint that can be brought up in an acrylic-based thinner. Or you can bring it up in a lacquer-based thinner and get good results with both. For those paints, I'm finding the AK Real Colors for me is kind of like Tamiya and Gunze had a child.
Yes, absolutely a great way to describe that.
And the child was AK Real Colors. In my hands, probably the nicest shooting lacquer I've ever shot would probably be the Akan range, if you've ever shot Akan lacquers.
Right, the Russian range.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I mean, they stink to
yes.
stink to hat, but they shoot beautifully, and they smell a lot like PPG Duracryl, and that's what I actually dilute them in, which makes my house smell like an automotive shop. But Second to the Icon lacquers, the best lacquer I've ever shot would have to be Gunze, and AK Real Colors shoots as well as Gunze. So, yeah, but unlike Gunze, you can bring the AK and the Tamiya up in either an acrylic water-based or a lacquer-based thinner, and the paints behave really well in both. So that's the AC/DC category, I call it. And for percent paints there, again, what I'm finding with the AK Real Colors is very similar to Tamiya, which is again similar to the Gunze range. And for that general work, I'm shooting about 30 or 40% paint, 60 to 70% thinner. And I find that I took the AK Real Colors, just like with the Gunze, I took it down to about 25% paint with a 0.15 millimeter tip, and a working distance of about 4 millimeters. And I was shooting a 0.5 millimeter wide line.
Yep.
And people say it's a pencil wide line, and I say only if it's been sharpened.
Yes. Well, when we have you back next, and we will have you back next, I want to get into the discussion of needle and nozzle sizes, because I don't think that most modelers think about that subject very much.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to say about it.
Yeah.
So next time we have you on, I want to talk about needle and nozzle sizes and why you need more than one.
That is an awesome topic for discussion, because part of at least my approach to shooting airbrushes is matching the size of that nozzle needle combo, the tip, matching the size of the tip to the dilution. So you're not going to be shooting 50% paint through a 0.15 tip. Likewise, I don't ever see myself shooting 20% paint through a 0.4 tip. So, that's a great idea. I'd love to talk about that.
Well, we will definitely do so next time.
Great.
Well, John, tell everybody where they can find you once again, and we won't have to run your ad.
Nice.
We'll run it anyway.
That's modelpaintsolutions.com, and hit the site. And if you go up to the right-hand side, you'll see the paint booth, and all the articles will drop down. And if you have any questions on airbrushing or diluting paints or finishing paints of any kind, drop me a line and I will get back to you.
And again, I want to emphasize again, not to blow sunshine up John's skirt, but he truly is. If you shoot him an email with a problem, he will respond to you. And he's one of those good guys in modeling that is looking to help the modeler solve his problem. So again, shoot him a lot. Go to his website, look around. There's a lot of great articles, but also if you're having a problem with something, shoot him a line. I guarantee you he's got an answer for you.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, John, thanks for joining us again, and we'll get you back on real soon.
Sounds good, guys. Have a good one.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that interview. Dr. Miller has promised us that he will return in a future episode to answer further questions and give further tips and tricks regarding airbrushing and all things paint. So stay tuned for upcoming episodes. Mike, do you have a shout out for this episode?
I've got two. One is the standard support shout out with several names. I'll get into it first, but when I'm done with that, you do yours.
You got it.
Plastic Model Mojo would like to thank Robert Morales, Kenneth Spar, John Ozachka, Warren Dixon, Paul Wheeler, Matt O'Meara, and Ian McCauley, and just under the wire, Robert Hallinger, for their contributions to Plastic Model Mojo financially. These gentlemen have generously donated to our cause to help bring this podcast to you. If you would like to join in this effort, please do so by going to www.plasticmodelmojo.com, and you will find a heart icon in the upper right-hand corner of the web page. You can use that to make a direct PayPal contribution to our efforts, and this has all been a huge help, paying for equipment, paying for hosting, etc. we really, really appreciate it. It's really been flattering how much we've actually got, and we just appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Very much, guys. And also, all of you people who were just listed, if you have not sent me an email to loulaw@aol.com, if you haven't sent me an email with your name and address, please do so. I've got something for each and every one of you. So please do that. My shout out of the month is actually your fault.
Uh-oh.
Archer dry transfers. Although in this case, they're not dry transfers. They're decal sets, because Archer was a fixture at amps. I've been familiar with Archer for years. I've actually gotten some of their dry transfer products over the years, which, by the way, they've now are discontinuing the dry transfer portion of their business. But your recommendation to get these resin decals, rivet decals, added a new tool in my toolbox. I learned something new. I tried something new. I was very pleased with the result. They're not very expensive, and they're definitely worth the price. And they're easy to apply. I highly, highly, highly recommend Archer's resin surface detail decals. They're a tool in the toolbox for adding more detail to your model. So I've got you to thank for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for trying them out first.
You're welcome. Didn't realize I was being guinea pigged. I'll get you back. Don't worry.
Well, my other shout out is for John Notestad at Red Frog Hobbies. John Benani had put me onto them because I was trying to find this particular set of Life Color paint. And I placed the order, and sometimes things don't happen as they should. And something happened. We don't know what. I was having trouble getting this order fulfilled for whatever reason. We were at the IPMS Roscoe Turner show, and I was looking at some paint and finishing stuff, and there's a lot of nice stuff on this guy's table. And I said, I might need some of this stuff later. Do you happen to have a card? And he handed me a card, and it was John from Red Frog Hobbies. And I said, I've got an order out with you that's like 2 months stale and has not been fulfilled yet. What's going on about that? And he was very gracious, very apologetic, and he's fulfilled that order. And I saw a ship notice just come to me a couple days ago that order is on the way. And let's just say he made it right. I won't get into what he did, but he made it very favorable.
Well, that's good.
That's good that he stood by his business. And I don't know what happened there. Something got lost in translation, but he was able to verify my order and took care of it. And John, I really appreciate that. I'm going to be doing more business with you in the future because of your attention to making bad things go away.
And you know what? In general, my experience, with very rare exception, my experience in the hobby has been that these hobby retailers, online show retailers, however they're involved in the business, in general are a bunch of really good guys who will go out of their way to make sure that you get what you need. And they're in business to make money, but they're also good at customer service because many of them are modelers as well. So they know what we're experiencing.
Got anything else?
Nope. That's it, Mike. I think this is going to be a record-long episode.
Well,
so
it may be, Dave. So we better cut it off here and get on down the road with other things. So as they always say, Dave, so many kits,
so little time. See you next time, Mike.
We'll catch you next time.